Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Whitney and I'm here with Blick Art Materials. I'm going to be doing a demo today on traditional wax batik. So what is that? What is traditional batik? Let me slow down. I always get excited at the beginning of these videos. I'm going to go over our materials before I jump into the process so you know what we're working with. And this does use fabric dye, which has some particulars to it that I want to make sure we all understand before we get into the fun part of making stuff. So this is my wax. This is Jacquard batik wax. It's actually a 75-25 blend of paraffin and beeswax. So it's kind of, beeswax is very, very soft and paraffin is a little bit more brittle. It's a little stronger. And this is blended that way to give the optimal baseline of what you would need to do a wax batik. I won't be demoing any sort of changes to that percentage blend, but you can play with how much wax, beeswax versus paraffin to yield different results. But honestly, there is so much going on in this project that I didn't even want to go there. So maybe stay tuned and we'll have a Batik 2.0 and do some other wacky, crazy stuff, but we're going to keep this pretty straightforward for the purposes of this demo. You can see I have some chunks broken off here. Now I just used an old kitchen knife to carefully, and notice I have the blade pointing away from me. Feels a little awkward to hold, but you always want a blade not facing your body, right? So that way if I slip, it's going away from me. It's not going to go towards me, my face, my body, nothing like that. And this is something you definitely want an adult to do. In fact, let me show you my next tool, which will solidify your desire for an adult supervision. This is going to be my wax melter. Now this will get very hot. I don't have it plugged in right now, so I am going to touch all of its parts and pieces here to explain it to you. But you do want to be careful. This will heat up when it is plugged in. Now there is a hole, very, very, very tiny hole at the bottom of this. And the wax melter pen comes with a, we'll call it a pin. And this pin has kind of a sharp point. You actually get 2 of these in the package in case you lose one or need to replace it, or they can become damaged if you press down too hard with your pen. But what that does is I'm going to slip this right in here. And that is going to act as a gravity feed for my pen. So now, you might not be able to see on our cameras, but that little pin that I was just showing you is now protruding from the bottom. And when I put it on my finger here, I can feel it. So I know that that is in there properly. You also get this really great little stand. The small things sometimes. This stand is fantastic because this is going to heat up. Let me put this over here where you can see, and you want it to be able to stand up. And when it is in this upright position and your pin is in place, you're still going to have some wax that drips out, but that is going to be its sort of off position. And we can talk about it a bit more when I'm using it, how different angles change the flow. I do want to pull over one of these. This is a more traditional Batik Tjanting tool. I have to admit, these are a little bit more complicated. So you're heating your wax separately, you pour it in, and then depending on the angle of how you hold it, it's going to change the flow of your wax. I found that, and I played with this one a little bit, and you can see my wax stain there. I found this to be very hard for me to control. I paint, I draw. I like to think I have good control of my hands most days. But that was, it added another layer to think about when really I just wanted to understand the process and get to a finished piece. So I found using this wax melt pen to be a lifesaver. It made it really, really simple for me, and I didn't have to have a separate apparatus to heat up my wax. I didn't have to worry about the temperature of the wax. I know that this is going to be set to an ideal temperature where the wax will actually penetrate through the fibers of the fabric without burning it or becoming too liquid and too hot. And it also, the reverse, where if your wax isn't hot enough, as you can imagine, if it doesn't penetrate the fabric, then it's not going to act as a resist, which is what we're using it as in this process, right? The wax is our resist. Okay, one more thing. Let's talk about the dye that I'm using. So this is the Procion MX dye. This is made by Jacquard. It is a cold water dye for natural fibers. Now, there is a lot of information on fabric dyeing out there, and sometimes it can become a little confusing or intimidating. I have to admit, as someone who, I'm certainly crafty and artsy, and I paint and I draw and I make a lot of things, but fiber art is its own particular science in a way. And so one way to get around not actually diving into it all at, well, instead of having to research things that may or may not be beneficial to you, like getting to the information that you need, there are a few options and a few resources out there. Specifically, on our website, if you are on the product page for Jacquard MX dye, Procion MX dye, right underneath the product description, but before that long line of all the beautiful colors they offer, there are just some tabs on our website, and this is on dickblick.com, right? And one of those tabs says resources. Now, this is something that's really easy to scroll right past and never even see. There are a few other tabs while you're there, check them out. There's a Q&A and reviews, things like that. But was most handy for us, and what we're doing here today, is that resources tab. It is going to have a whole list of different PDFs that you can download, and those are directly from Jacquard. So today we are doing immersion dyeing, and I have all of their information right here. They even have, somewhere in here I have, yes, a color mixing chart and the proportions of each color you need to make and mix new colors. There is just so much info there that's really going to help you out. Specifically, we want to look at immersion dyeing. And we will be dyeing, what I learned is a protein fiber. There are cellulose fibers and protein fibers. Cellulose fibers are things that come from plants. So cotton, linen, they're natural, they're organic and from our environment, and they are comprised of cellulose. Now, silk is going to be a protein fiber. Comes from a silkworm. It's protein-based. And that is important for this because those two different fibers, even though they're both natural, there's a different process for dyeing them. So if you do want to do this at home on cotton, definitely look up that data sheet there, because it's going to be a different process for you than what you're seeing me do here. All right, let's get into it, right? So what is the process and what are we doing? All right, so I have some water here. And you know, before I really get into it, let me bring this over. So this is where we're going with our project. This is my finished wax batik sample. To get this, I used multiple layers of dye baths. In fact, if we're still on the big screen there, I used these 4 colors specifically. So I did 4 different dye baths. Now, the first one, and my main color, is this light pink. And this is called bubblegum. It's a really fun name for a color and accurate. It looks like bubblegum. So first, I'm going to dye my entire piece of fabric with bubblegum. Not the kind you chew, but the color. Let me move this bowl over here just a little bit. You don't need to see it just yet. It's just a bowl of water. And I have a measuring cup, 1 cup. And even though this is a cold water dye, I'm going to use a little bit of hot water to help mix and dissolve my dye. So I'm going to pour 1 cup of hot water. Thank you, Tessa. I told you you'd probably have to remind me, and you did. I have the lovely Tessa here today to remind me of all sorts of things, to not lean into the overhead camera. And specifically there, what I just did is I plugged in my wax pen, so that will be nice and hot when we're ready to go. Thank you, Tessa. I'm gonna put a little piece of wax in now too. It may drip through, but we'll see. Okay, back to our dye bath. I need, now my proportions here, my overall proportions, and I just covered it up, is I'm using 8 cups of water. So in this bowl, I have 6 cups of cold water. I have 1 cup of hot water here. And I need 1/2 teaspoon of dye. Now truly I should be using an actual measuring teaspoon. I can tell you I have used this plastic spoon for all of these examples and their measuring, so I'm feeling pretty confident in my proportions here. I'm just gonna sort of tap this in to my hot water. You do want to, and I may even demonstrate a best practice here, is step back from the powder. You do not want to breathe in dyes or really any kind of powdered pigment. It's just not safe. It's not good for your lungs. You can always wear a mask. It's not so intense that you need something like a respirator. But you just don't want to inhale those tiny, tiny particles. Oh, come back here. And I like to sort of, when I see a big clump, I try to catch it and mush it, for lack of better terms. But I think I can stand a little closer here now. I don't have any powder, but I do know I have some lumps down on the bottom. So I'm really, this might seem like overkill, but I do really want this dye to be totally and completely dissolved. I can actually show you what happens if you don't totally dissolve your dye is you'll get some spots of darker color. And well, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? Like this is still, I think, a lovely piece, but there are these little imperfections. And especially since we're doing 4 dye baths, those might not show up in the end if I were to dye this a second time, a third, and then a fourth. But it's going to ensure that you just have even coverage. Makes life easier. You'll be happier with your finished product. All right, so now I'm going to pour this into my water. And next step, so I said we need 8 cups of water. I now have 7. So I'm going to make another cup of hot water. Probably should have done this the other way around because of volume, but I'm going to add in my salt now. And again, I'm adding salt into hot water because I want it to dissolve completely as possible. And this is, I should note, this is what is called plain salt. So it does not have iodine added to it. And this can be found at most grocery stores. But it is something to look for on the label. And when you're reading those instructional packets and things from Jacquard, it does make a reference to plain salt. I want to make sure everyone knows that is actually a term for a specific kind of truly plain salt with no iodine. And this is just going to, not totally dissolved there, but for our purposes, it's going to be all right. And I'm going to keep stirring in this dye bath as well. Let me get the rest of that salt. Okay. All right, let's bring this back to where you can see it better. I'm going to give this another good stir. Now I've got to say, for one of our projects, this one has the most stirring. All right, that looks pretty good to me. Now, the color of your dye bath is not necessarily an indicator of the color that you are dyeing your fabric. I should have pointed out also when I poured this, and maybe you can see on the bottom there, the dye itself for the color bubblegum is this sort of taupe-ish color. So don't be alarmed or discouraged by that. It is okay. I'm going to check the temperature of my water. I don't want it to be too hot, but because this is the first one, there's no wax on here. So I at least know I'm not going to dissolve my image if it is too hot. It might damage the silk a little bit, but it should not be hot enough for that. So we're going to do a little bit of a pretend game here. I would leave this in for 10 minutes or so. And you do want to stir it. You don't have to stir it the whole 10 minutes by any means, but maybe stir it about halfway through and then come back. And I am going to put on my glove for this. These dyes will most certainly stain your hands. So it's good to have some super cool rubber gloves around. All right, now the final bit is my vinegar. Because to dye silk, you need what you might have heard referred to as an acid dye. Now, this is don't be confused or look at this. This says 2/3. I'm going to cover it up with my thumb. You need 1/3 of a cup of vinegar. I just didn't happen to have the right measuring cup. So I'm going to make sure I only pour in 1/3. And then, should put on my other glove every time. And open up your fabric again, and back in it goes. Give it a nice stir. And that is going to sit in the dye bath for a total of 35 to 45 minutes. I like to set interval timers so that I can come back and mix it. And this is actually a perfect example. See how there's a little air bubble trapped under there? If I were to walk away from this and come back in 45 minutes, that area there, and there, that tiny little bubble there, those would be lighter than the rest of the fabric, simply because they're not exposed to dye, right? So I'm gonna push it down, but you know, new ones are gonna pop up. You just wanna make sure you keep stirring it. And I have seen beautiful images of big rocks being used to weigh down fabric, but for our purposes, this is such a small piece, and I'm not dyeing yards of fabric, so it's okay. All right, now let's pretend that 45 minutes have passed, and beautiful. I've taken out my piece of silk, I rinsed it out in some cold water, and I hung it up to dry. And I just let that drip dry. I have an image below, and I've already started to stretch this piece. There's a layer right underneath my silk, right before my image. I have a layer of plastic, and then my cardboard underneath that. And this little plastic layer is really just to keep the wax from getting onto my source image that I'll be tracing, and making the fabric stick to it. I'm also going to tighten this up just a little bit. As I mentioned before, I do have a background in painting, so I'm used to stretching canvases on stretcher bars where you really get in there and you tug and you use your thumbs, and it's pretty intense. This is not canvas. If you are a painter, keep that in mind. It's just silk, so it just needs a little bit of coercion there to get into place. That also takes out some of the wrinkles. That'll keep me from skipping over it with my pen. All right, and this is our moment. I'm gonna move this source image over so I can pull my wax pen over, and you can see. How are we, Tessa? Can everyone see all this? Yep. Okay, Tessa says we're good. I am going to add some wax pieces. You can see I am dripping wax. I do have a piece of newsprint here, and that's catching my drips of wax. They're coming out the bottom of the tool. But as you saw, you can just pick those right up and put them back in. In fact, I would recommend not using newsprint because all those drops I just made, those are just going to absorb into the paper and I can't save them. But if you were to have this over something like parchment, some aluminum foil from the kitchen, you would be able to save all of that wax and you just keep using it. Now you also might notice I'm holding a piece of paper now over here, and that's just to, I think of it as my saucer, right? It's going to go everywhere my pen goes, and it's going to catch those drips. And I'm just gonna get started. I'm gonna pull this back over here. And already I've made a little drip where I didn't want one, but that's okay. We are doing this in so many layers, and maybe pull that over so you can see where we're going with it. there are going to be cracks and maybe some drips, and sometimes the color from one dye bath will sneak under the wax, and it really is part of the charm of batik, truly. You might notice I'm skipping over some things in my image. I'm doing the basic outline, and that's because I'm going to come back to those parts later. And sometimes something that you want to leave open ends up filling up. I'm saying this now because it just happened. I wanted those little leaves open, but again, just keep moving forward with it. It helps to do a little bit of practice first, whether it's on paper or another piece of fabric, a scrap. I did some, up here, I did some examples just playing with lines. Time for new wax. And lines and circles and dots, and just getting a feel for the tool itself. And sometimes if you let the wax go down too far, if you run out of too much wax before you add the new wax, sometimes you'll have to set it back over here and give it a minute so your wax will heat up enough. And I'm just going to do all of this. And you can actually hear when the tip of the pen comes in contact with the silk. And because this pen tip is sharp, sometimes it catches a little bit. You might see my hand jumping a bit. And it's just sort of caught on a strand in the silk there. But I haven't had anything tear or anything like that. I don't think, oh, yep, out of wax. When I'm talking and demoing this for all of you, it's a lot harder to keep an eye on my wax levels. This will become a bit more of a fluid process for you when you're able to fully concentrate on the task at hand. And you'll notice too, or something I've noticed, I should say, is when I add a whole lot of wax, like if I were to fill this all the way up, because this is a gravity drip feed, I'm putting more pressure on that pin, and it can actually, that's when I first started up here and this all filled in, that was really just that I had too much wax and I couldn't get a fine line like that. That's a beauty. That's where I want my lines to be. And, you know, sometimes it takes a minute to get into the groove of the tool that you're using, and that's okay. This isn't rocket science. We're just playing around with some really fun techniques. So now I have my first layer. So that is everything that is here in pink or another color there as well. I'm gonna take it off of my stretcher. Now my next step would be to put this into a dye bath, made exactly the same way as the first dye bath that I showed you, where I used 8 cups of water. I used 1/4 of a cup of salt, plain salt, and then after 10 minutes, I added 1/3 of a cup of vinegar. So I would do, and half a teaspoon of dye, of course. And the next color I would make is peach. And I would dip this right in the same way as I did the first. You can see it kind of sticks to the plastic. You can actually do this using stretcher bars. I have one here I can show you. It's a little bit smaller than my piece, but I could have put this up here and stretched it, and then it wouldn't stick to the back, to the plastic. But really, that is going to give me some of these cracks and create this effect here, which I love and find so charming. It's artist choice there, if you do want to put it on a stretcher bar. But this is different from silk painting. It doesn't require a stretcher bar, and I'm not worried about where to put this. I am worried about. I'm not worried about color pooling in areas on a flat surface, like I would be with silk painting. Okay, so we'll pretend I put that in a peach dye bath, and ta-da! 45 minutes later, I rinsed this out in cold water and hung it up to dry. Now there's wax on it though, so when rinsing it out, do be gentle. You don't want to crumple it and make too many cracks or risk knocking wax off of the piece entirely. You just want to rinse out excess dye. So do be careful now that there is wax on the piece when you're rinsing it out in water. And I know sometimes faucets are so strong you could really like just knock a piece of wax right off straight under the faucet. So just be careful with your water pressure and no crumpling. All right, this is my peach. So this is gone through 2 dye baths. You can still see the pink underneath my wax drawing. This was the first wax drawing. And now areas that were not covered in that first round of wax, those are now peach. And I am ready for my 3rd dye bath and my 2nd layer of wax. So I'm just going to add some accents, and it helps that you all can see where we're going. So I'm going to cover sort of the inside middle of my flower here. And I also want to fill in those leaves. And you can see maybe once as you get this base image down, things start to go very quickly. Because you've got a bit of an idea now of where your image is. You're not, I mean, I did leave my template underneath, but I'm not struggling to look at it or follow it because most of what it is on my piece. And this is a good time to let you all know, I'm sorry, that we do have templates available for you all as well on our website. So the same image that I am working with here, you can also work with. Or you can find your own image or make your own image, or if you're watching this and thinking, whoa, that is too much. you can always make patterns and designs, and they are absolutely lovely as well. I have some over here. Don't want to get it in the wax, but even just drawing lines and changing the color a bit can be so much fun. I really don't want anyone to be intimidated by the drawing aspect of this. Most of it is pretty simple, and any mistakes you can cover up in the next dye bath, or really, though, they just add so much charm, I think. Okay, I have my leaves here. A good little tip is, as you're doing this and as you're adding your layers of wax, sometimes you can get a bit lost as to what's been recently covered and what you should be covering. But hopefully our camera has picked up. Oh, let me move this little string here. Hopefully our camera is picking up the difference where I've just made lines. They're more translucent. That's the word I'm looking for. They are more translucent than the rest of the fabric, but they are still orange, right? And the lines from the dye bath before, from the previous drawing, those are going to remain that bubblegum pink. So that can sort of help act as a roadmap as you follow along. And if you realize, you know, if I put this in my dye bath right now and then take it out and realize I missed this leaf, it's not the end of the world. You can do that in the next round. I did notice it just now though, so I will add my little line. And then hopefully you're getting the idea of how this process all goes down. I'm going to unstretch my piece. I'm going to give it a little pull here. You can see the lovely wax buildup on the back. And I am going to set this aside, but what you will be doing is making a third dye bath, this time using burgundy. And maybe I should have said at the beginning, but you're probably getting a pretty good idea of how this works, is you're layering colors, right? So I started out, my hand's not big enough for all 3 bottles. All right, I started out with the bubblegum, this beautiful light pink. My next color was a darker peach. Now I'm making kind of a leap all the way to this burgundy. And the burgundy is actually on its own. I need more hands, people. Let me put this down. I'm clearly very excited about the burgundy. The burgundy is this red line color. So it's more of a dark, dark red on its own. And it is, in this one, there's a more subtle shift between the 3rd and the 4th dye bath, but hopefully you can make out those burgundy dots there, the burgundy and the flower here. Okay, so every time you add a new color, it's going to get a little bit darker than the previous color. Or rather, you need to choose a color that is darker than the previous color. Okay, and also keep in mind general color mixing rules. Like if I mixed, let's say I started out with a green dye base, and then the next color I layered over that, if I used a, what did I just say? Green. So if I used a red over a green, I would end up with like a brown everywhere there wasn't wax. And sometimes you want a brown. But just keep in mind, as you're layering, you're mixing, you're going to be making the colors darker, but you're also going to be changing the nature of that color. Almost like mixing in watercolor, right? Or doing layers of washes in watercolor. You would never put down a dark blue wash before your light green wash, right? Because that light green, you're never going to see it on top of a dark blue. It's going to disappear. And that same principle holds true here. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much on that and I explained it well. You'll let me know in the comments if I didn't, and I'm super happy to clarify. I'm going to add a little bit more wax. I want a smaller chunk than that. A little bit of wax to my pen. And now I am on my final layer. This is actually a really exciting stage, I should say, in the project, because you're starting to see all the colors working together. I'm seeing my orange, I'm seeing my pink, I have this beautiful burgundy red. And wherever I want to keep that burgundy red, just like we did with the peach, wherever we wanted to keep the peach, we put wax. So now I am going to put wax wherever I want to keep my burgundy red. So I want the outside edge of my flower to have wax. I want that to stay burgundy. I see somewhere along the line I missed the center of this one, so I'm just going to fill that in. That's perfectly okay. And now I'm sort of, I should tell you, I'm tapping more than pulling across the surface. And that's because I'm trying to fill a smaller area. I'm not necessarily drawing, I'm filling an area. And I really want to make sure I get good coverage. This is also a good point in time to make sure that if you notice anywhere where your wax has gone away. So we're putting this into a bath with acid and salt and dye and all of those chemicals. They are going to start to eat away at this wax, and I can feel, it's not necessarily something you can see on camera, but this is very flat here and I don't feel the wax anymore. So I know that this got sort of eaten away, right? And I want to make sure I don't want to lose any more color or definition there. I don't want it to disappear the next time I do a dye bath. So I'm just going to cover over that surface again. And sometimes it's hard to trace over the exact same lines, but that's okay. Again, it's all going to add to the charm of the piece. I want to fill in the edge of these flowers. And more wax. And I am curious, are we okay on time, Tessa? Great. Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly fill this in. And while I'm doing that, it might be a good time to mention, so I finished this piece, you know, the one I covered up with some scrap paper over here, this finished piece. I finished it with a dye bath of blue, a dark blue, a navy. And in traditional batiks, the final dye bath, what you do is you cover your entire piece with wax. So for that, I would actually use a paintbrush. And then the last color is black, and you really crumple and try to make as many crackles as you can in the wax. And that just creates this beautiful, surprising black crackle line in the piece. And I will share and admit with you all here, I didn't have the guts to do it with my final piece. I got to this point and was like, it's beautiful, it's done, I want nothing else. I want no options to mess it up at this final stage, right? And it's my artwork, right? That's my choice, and it's your choice too. So if you are feeling brave, I would encourage you to do a final dye bath in black with that crackle effect to really to see what happens. And go ahead and post it. Hashtag us. Let us know you posted it. I would love to see how it turns out for you. And I'm just making some decorative dots, we'll call them, around the outside. And I know these are going to be very subtle, but I just want a little bit of something to go on in the outside corners here. So I'm just making kind of a random placement of a grouping of 3 dots. And I'm out of wax now, so I'm just going to take that as a message to let that be my number of dots. And you can see in this, they're very, very subtle, right? Very subtle color shift. So at this stage, we're at our 4th dye bath. So I would take these pins out, put them away, and take my piece off. And it's just lovely from the back side too. So this is ready for the final 4th dye bath. I'll go ahead and let you know the proportions again in case you missed it earlier. For 8 cups of water, I used half a teaspoon of dye and 1/4 of a cup of salt. After 10 minutes, I took the piece out and then added in 1/3 of a cup of not water, 1/3 of a cup of vinegar, and then mixed it all up well and put my fabric back into the dye bath. And for those powders, for the salt and for the pigment, the dye, I did mix those in hot water first. But you want to make sure you're not using too much hot water. You don't want to make a hot water dye bath. You just want it to be hot enough to dissolve the powder and then add it into some cold water to equalize it a bit more. I'm going to pull this to the side, bring my piece out. So at the very end, you will have a piece covered in wax. In fact, let me bring this one back over. We'll pretend I actually put this one through the dye, and I'm just going to go ahead and show you that final process here because it's really fun to actually show. You're going to crumple your fabric. By that, I mean the thing you've been careful not to do every time you rinse it out in cold water. You're going to do it. You're going to ball this up, going to roll it around, and you can see almost like dandruff. My little wax bits are just like falling right off of the fabric. And that will only get off so much wax though, right? There's still, I can feel huge clumps on here. And give it another shake. Sorry, Tessa, there's gonna be wax all over this table.
No worries.
All right, so now it's looking a little rough, right? It's there's some clumps, there's some, it looks rough. It does not look like this piece by any means. So what comes next? There are 2 methods. You can use an iron with good old newsprint in between both sides of your fabric, and the iron is just set to a silk setting, and the paper is going to absorb the wax. Or you can put it into into hot water, really boiling water or near boiling, and the wax will then melt and it rises to the top, leaving your fabric clean. I did a mix of both of those techniques. I first used my iron and my wax paper, what turned into wax paper, my iron and my newsprint. I brought some here to show you all, because you can also do batik on paper. Now, I didn't really anticipate how beautiful some of these would be, and just these residual pieces where all I was doing was absorbing the wax. And this one really picked up a lot of dye. That actually means that piece, which is this piece. I didn't rinse it out enough before I took the wax out, but that's okay. I rinsed it more later. And this one here, they're really fun. So I would encourage you, maybe set aside a few pieces of good paper and see what happens when you try to lift the wax off that way and onto good paper. Because you really have the start of a whole other kind of art that's really beautiful. But I found, and with this piece, you can see sort of this dark halo effect around where the drawing was in wax. And that is actually, that's not a discoloration of the dye. That is evidence that there is wax there. So there is wax up to this edge, and then this is clean, super clean. And wax around my dot, right? So this really means it needs something else to get all of that wax out. And I really found that doing the iron method first, that gets the majority of all of the wax out. And then when it's at this stage, then I would put it into hot water to really remove that halo. Even so, I mean, I can't feel the wax. It's still soft fabric. So if you like the halo effect, go with it. Go with the halo. It is artist choice, right? Always. But if you really want this to disappear, then it needs a nice super hot water bath, almost to the boiling point, but you don't want to leave it in there too long. You are going to shift the color of your dye a little bit. And if your water is too hot, you'll also damage your silk. And the reason I didn't go straight to the water bath removal for the wax is that your wax, it comes to the top and it pools, right? But you can't pour that down the drain. That is going to ruin your plumbing. Please don't do that and blame me. I am telling you now, do not pour wax down your drain. You have to then wait for it to cool. Or you can ladle it out into another container and let it cool. The benefit to that is if that wax is clean of dirt or dye, you can put it right back in your batik pen and keep using it. So really, you can recycle your wax. And as you can see, you get a lot of wax. I know these are small sample pieces that I worked on here to show you, but this is all the wax I've used for all these projects. All of them. These little ones, this big one. So really, you can get a lot of use out of this one brick of batik wax. And really, oh gosh, did I miss anything big, Tessa? Big ideas. I did, yes, asking you made me remember. I did bring these in to show you just how, you know, I forget why now even, but I dyed all of these in batches of 2. and I wanted to be able to show you original colors and some color shifts. So these are gonna get all waxy now. So this piece here, this actually started out as this bright green, and then I put burgundy over it to get this really dark fall apricot color. But honestly, this project is so addictive because even just as is, as a silk color, no drawing whatsoever, these are beautiful. I'm wearing one, I forgot. I'm wearing one that is, I didn't even batik. I just loved the color so much. And so they can be really addictive. And the thing is, if you mess up with a dye bath, dye it a darker color. Keep the ball rolling, just keep it going. Worst case scenario, you mess up too many times and you just end up with a beautiful black silk scarf. But I don't think anyone's gonna be messing up. It's a super simple process and it's really, really fun to do. I know I had a lot of fun making all of these examples for you, and I hope you have fun making your